what is so scary about death? I mean, when did death become a spooky topic? Don't go near a cemetery, or man, funeral homes really freak me out. I know one woman who swore off wearing black ever in her life because when she bought her first and only black dress, her mother died the following week. And she said, if you wear black, somebody's going to die. Well, today I'm wearing black, and I'm sure that somewhere in the world, somebody's going to die because people die every day. But whoever dies today is not going to die because I'm wearing black. They're going to die because death is part of life. One actor said, I'm not afraid of death. I just don't want to be there when it happens. One woman said, the fear of not being remembered is a dangerous thing. A 13-year-old boy sadly said, it's not that I don't fear death. I just fear what's on the other side. And a prominent Hindu said, though we are terrorized by death, it's not different from birth. It just happens. Now, obviously, not everybody is prepared for eternity. But as believers, we know that we're prepared. We know what's on the other side because the Word of God tells us. In fact, God said, precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his saints. But yet I know a number of believers who still fear death. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to think about it. They're just afraid of it, even though they know with an assurance that they're going to be with the Lord for eternity. And I wonder if part of that fear is because there's such a more of a connection to things on earth than there really is to things in heaven. The Apostle Paul said, set your minds or your affections on things above, not on earthly things, for you died and your life is now hidden with Christ in God. And then he said, put to death whatever belongs to the earthly nature. And then he gives a list of fleshly sins that we need to die to. And the last one he mentions is including greed, which is idolatry. Now, idolatry is anything that we put above or beside God, something that we worship besides God, or we elevate it beyond him. And I wonder if we worship life on this earth more than we worship spending eternity with him. Think about it. We're in church on Sunday, and we're singing that song, Edge of Heaven, and we're singing, here we are, living on the edge of heaven, clinging to your holy presence, longing to be where you are. And God sits up and says, really? They're on the edge of heaven? They're longing to be where I am? I can make that happen. You go to the doctor the next day, and you get a report from the doctor, you have 3 to 6 months to live. And we freak out and say, God, what did I do to deserve this? And God's like, what? Yesterday, you wanted to be in my presence. I gave you a free one-way ticket to get here, and I gave you 3 to 6 months to get your house together. So what happened between yesterday and today? God really takes that seriously, but we forget that to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. So I've been thinking this week about what makes death so scary. I mean, if Jesus took the sting out of death, why does it still sting for us to even think or talk about it? And I've kind of narrowed it down to 2 things. There might be 5 or 10 or 20 or 100 things that people can come up with, but I've narrowed it down to 2 things. And the first one is that death is one thing we cannot control. We don't control when we die, how we die, where we are when we die. It just happens. And we don't control how old we're going to be when we die. We don't control what's going to happen immediately after we die. It is an experience that we go through that we don't know a whole lot about. One woman who does not believe in heaven or hell said she feared death because She feared no longer existing. Now, this is the opposite of those in the Western world who believe that reincarnation is just amazing. And I think some people in Western thinking will hold on to reincarnation because they've got this life, but then in the next life it's going to be better, and in the next life it'll even be more wonderful. If they're good enough now, then the next life is even going to elevate them higher. Never having to face death, but continuing to live and to live and to live. But to Buddhists and Hindus who know the reality of reincarnation, say that reincarnation really is a curse to humans because the soul never finds rest. Spending eternity with God is ultimate rest for the soul. In fact, facing death is an ultimate test of trust in Him because we have no control over it. All our lives we hear, trust God to answer this prayer. Trust God to provide for your finances. Trust God to meet your needs. But that ultimate trust test is when we face death because we're really not sure how that passage is going to be going from earth to eternity. If you've ever been on a team, maybe you took part in team building exercises where they'll divide people into pairs, and one person is the catcher and the other person will stand in front of them and fall backwards, and the catcher is going to catch them because the person who's falling trusts that they're going to catch them and not drop them. Or they might pair you up and blindfold one person and the other person leads them through an obstacle course or a minefield, and the blindfolded person trusts that their partner is going to lead them safely to the other side. If a team member is diligent enough to catch a person who's falling, how much more trusting is God, who will catch us when we fall into His arms at that point of death. It is an ultimate surrender, and it's the ultimate test of trust. We surrender to death. We enter His presence at no charge. It's a free passage. And then the second reason I think that we find death scary is because we mourn who or what we're going to leave behind. And I wonder if part of death's sting isn't so much that we die, but part of the sting is that we're mourning, even before we die, the loss of earthly possessions or material things. But if we can die to these things before we die, then we can focus more on what's ahead. Jesus put things into perspective when He said it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to make it into heaven, because his priorities are wrong. If he's trusting in riches, it's going to be very difficult for him to get into heaven. And then Jesus said, lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, not on earth, or that riches can be deceitful and can be very misleading, even to the most educated and knowledgeable people. I'm sure you heard of, or you remember Bernie Madoff, the financial guru, that great investor who created a Ponzi scheme that bilked thousands of people out of billions of dollars. Bernie Madoff today is serving 150 years in prison for what he did. He said that he wished he had been discovered years before because he felt once he was arrested, he was set free from a trap that he was in, but the entrapment also that he brought to other people. So a number of people, about 3 weeks after all of this came unraveled, several friends who had encouraged each other to invest with Madoff met for dinner. And as they're sitting around the table, one of the men in that group said, if you could have your money back right now, but it would mean giving up what you've learned by losing it, would you take the money? Or would you take what losing the money has given you? Now, he asked this question to people, 3 of whom had already filed bankruptcy. One of them had to move in with his children because he couldn't afford the house he was living in. A woman was moving into a garage apartment of a friend. Another couple was taking in boarders so they could afford to keep the house, and they would have some other financial compensation coming their way. Almost every person in that group, when that question was posed, almost every person in that group said, we would rather hold on to the lessons we've learned than get the money back. In fact, one man said, I had started to get complacent. It's as if the muscles in my heart started to atrophy. Now they're awake and alive, and I don't want to go back. He who loses his life will find it. So what has you anchored to this life that death is still scary? Are you afraid of leaving people behind, your kids, your grandkids? Invest in them now. Leave a legacy with them so the next generation can make a difference in the world after you're gone. Pass down your values. Tell your story. Tell them about their ancestry, the heritage from which you came and that you're passing on to them. Tell them about mistakes you made and lessons that you learned, or if you could go back and redo something over again, this is what you would do. Invest in them, not so much money, but just the value system that you have learned that has helped you become who and what you are today. And then remember that God loves your kids and your grandkids far more than you or I ever will. Live your life the way that you want them to live theirs. Are you concerned about leaving valuables in the hands of people who you don't really trust? Well, check your motives on that. And then don't control from the grave. Just release it because it's temporal. It's not eternal. Use wisdom now in getting your house in order. And remember that these things are all going to pass away. Don't let people or possessions become the anchor that keep you connected to earth more than to heaven. You know, we can remove the fear of death because Jesus removed the sting of death. What more is there to fear? Before I share one more story about this, let me give you next week's lesson. We're moving into chapter 15 already, and I want you to read Jeremiah 23 and chapter 15 in the book, 25 Questions God Asked. We're going to talk next week about finding God and purpose when you're in a place that you don't want to be. So Jeremiah 23 and then chapter 15 in the book. We have a pastor friend who a few months ago discovered that he had cancer and it was incurable. And not too long ago, maybe a couple of months ago now, he posted on Facebook, this is my last post on Facebook. I'm leaving Facebook. I'm now in the hands of hospice. And I love all of you friends. And remember that Jesus is coming soon. And that was the last post that he put on Facebook. About a week ago, his wife posted for him on her Facebook page, this message is from my husband. He is ready to die, and he had prayed this morning, God, let's get this show on the road. Now, some people might think, boy, that's kind of morbid, isn't it? No, that sounds very exciting to me, because what an awesome attitude to have when you know that your life here is ending. You have done everything you could. You've left a legacy for your kids and your grandkids. You're disconnected from what is on earth. You've lifted the anchor, so to speak, and you're ready now to go with the Lord to be in heaven. So my question for you is, if you died today, do you trust Jesus enough to catch you? Think about that. I'm praying for you. I hope you've enjoyed today's study. God bless you. Remember, Jesus took the sting out of death. We have nothing to fear. Have a wonderful, wonderful week. God bless you.